Good afternoon. Thanks for showing up. I'm here to take you on a journey towards agility at Maersk Line. I will talk about our successes, failures, and some lessons learned as well. So while these are my own views, of course I didn't do any of this on my own. We built a great team with different strengths and backgrounds. We used to hang out at Central Perks all the time, like on Friends, having coffee over retrospective, and so on. And we were definitely greater than the sum of our parts. And thanks to these guys, I have anything to say today. So enough about the team. A bit about our context, Maersk Line. Has any of you heard of Maersk Line before? Of course. Any customers? No customers. So Maersk Line is the largest shipping company, and it's a Danish company. We have like 600 of these vessels. A Maersk vessel calling a port around the world every 15 minutes. And I mean, even if you haven't heard of Maersk Line, probably the banana you ate this morning spent a bit of time in one of these. I'm not referring to the Chinese food stall, I'm referring to the container behind it. It's a 40-foot refrigerated container, which we call reefers. Well, my friends say that reefer is also a meaning for something else, but I have no idea about that. So we have 2.2 million of those containers in circulation. It's a truly global business with 300 offices around the world in 125 countries. It's massive. And we receive 23,000 bookings every day. So enough about Maersk Line. A bit about Maersk Line IT. There are 2,500 applications in the landscape, with core applications very tightly coupled. We have a lot of special case customers and customs rules, local rules and regulations that drive decentralization, unfortunately. And when it comes to IT, we work with outsourced teams located in different parts of the world and working with tier 1 vendors only. And unfortunately, we were a bit behind the times in terms of how we worked in IT. We only discovered this agile thing over the last few years. So how did our journey begin? So in order to tell you about our journey, and we need to zoom back in time a little bit. So we go back to 2007. Hello, 2007. This was our customer-facing website. As you can see, there's a lot of information and news about Maersk Line, and it's a hub for Maersk Line's customers. And in 2007, we used to receive 40% of our bookings through the website. So you can also look up prices for your containers. You can place bookings. You can do your documentation online. You can track your containers if you want to. And 10 years after its launch, MaerskLine.com was the best in the industry, according to Gartner. But it was still a bit crap. And no wonder it was a bit crap, because we took our eyes off the ball. We forgot what really matters, our customers. We actually launched training programs for customers to be able to use the website. How embarrassing is that? Instead of listening to them, we were focused on our internal process efficiencies and our processes and regulations. Very embarrassing. Eventually, it became very, very difficult to attract new customers. Especially, when you compare it to other industries, like airlines, which really worked on hard on improving customer experience. It's easy to find what you want. Getting to price is very easy. Booking a seat is quite straightforward. And if you have any problems, they're very good at handling exceptions. And that wasn't the case for us. And on top of this, it looks attractive, right? You would want to book a trip to Australia if you saw that picture. It's definitely attractive. And what is most important was they were constantly making changes, adding new features, tweaking the website, And they were very fast and flexible in doing so. They were making it even easier for their customers to use the website. For us, we were not only behind, moving at all was very frustrating, very painful. And I experienced this firsthand in 2007 when we launched the new booking and documentation applications on the website. The project was delivered a year late, and we had built up massive technical debt. Even changing a text field on the website was very expensive and very risky. We didn't want to make changes. No one wanted to touch the website. And if you asked our customers, this is how they saw us. Literally, you know, we were a big elephant to them. In 2008, we were supposed to have 5 releases on the website, and we ended up having only 2. We had planned for 450 requirements to be delivered that year. We ended up delivering only 90. So in theory, delivering something on the website should take 18 weeks, but in practice, it took 9 months. It was very frustrating. So we had a benchmark of what good looked like, something like this, obviously. But getting there was going to be very frustrating. We didn't just need a new customer experience, but we needed a better way of working, one that was more fast and flexible. So we made a case for agile development. We actually had to write a business case for this. So we took a revolutionary step with a new project, new platform, new team, and new way of working. The XLEAP project was born. And it was actually, it had very good publicity on the Danish press. The Maersk Line CEO put it at the time as like this. So this was our goal. Make it as simple to book a container as it is to buy a book on Amazon. So that was our goal. So we want to make it easier for our customers to do business with us. However, this way of working didn't really fit within the culture of Maersk Line. Remember, our customers saw us like an elephant. So we had to actually set up this project as a startup within the company. We quickly embraced the agile principles. So we had co-located teams in Copenhagen with product owners embedded in the teams. So that bridged the gap between business and IT. Launched to pilot customers after only 3 months, which was a very good improvement from our original 9 months. It was only a half-complete product. We didn't have the complete offering on the website, but the customers actually loved it. They were very much happy to be involved in improving, in helping us improve our services. And this was actually the first booking we received on the production side. That's the customer there. So by delivering early and often, we released value much faster than we thought. We involved customers early on in coming up with ideas for improvement. We went out and interviewed 70 customers around the world. It's a shame that we had never done that. And not only interviewing, but we spent some days with them trying to understand what their business is like, how they interact with Maersk Line, what the challenges are. And coming back from those interviews, obviously you have a lot of ideas. You want to test those ideas. So we created prototypes very quickly, hand-drawn, unfinished, and we ran some explorative interviews about these ideas. And it was very easy for us to get feedback on these ideas because they look very unfinished. Otherwise, they hold back their thoughts and opinions, but they were actually very good at criticizing our ideas as well and improving them at the same time. So they were very happy to be contributing to the changes we were trying to make. We had a plan, we had an organization in place when we started, but we had to adjust along the way. For instance, the first instance of our feature teams didn't have service developers inside the team, and that obviously created a bottleneck very, very quickly in the project. So what we did was to reorganize, and we involved those skills within the feature teams. So we also took on different roles as and when necessary. So we didn't have like defined roles for everyone, for anyone actually. We had to change our hiring practices in order to be able to do that. We wanted to hire T-shaped profiles, people who are generalists, who can go broad in many different areas of expertise, but also can have a deep expertise in one area. So not everything was bright and sunny, obviously. As I said, this was a very revolutionary approach to change. And we have a lot of mistakes and a lot of learnings, I would say. First of all, we didn't handle our stakeholders very well. When we showed them polished prototypes in order to communicate our vision, their expectations were increased massively. And it was really hard to change that. And they thought Agile was a silver bullet. We can deliver the whole new experience much faster and cheaper, which wasn't the case at all. And we actually scaled up very, very quickly. So when we first started, we were 15 people, and suddenly 3 months later we had 140 people in the team. So we had 5 feature teams checking in code on the same website. That created massive dependencies and coordination and communication problems, unfortunately. And we didn't really invest in our ability to scale up. We didn't have automated deployment, continuous delivery, none of that fancy stuff. And we scaled up very, very quickly without those skills. Unfortunately, we only had tacit knowledge of Agile. We had some training on Scrum, but we couldn't really explain to the rest of the organization why these practices work. We're doing daily stand-ups, we're inviting people over, this is how we work, this is how we do sprint planning and so on. How lovely is that? But we couldn't really explain, why do these actually work? Unfortunately, the real experts that we hired came on board a bit late in the process, and it was very difficult for us to manage our stakeholders, because especially they kept asking for detailed plans. And once we educated our stakeholders on things like cone of uncertainty, for instance, they moved on to new roles. It was too late. Our stakeholders changed all the time. And as I said, we had feature teams, but they are not a silver bullet either. We quickly realized that there were some dependencies outside of the feature teams which made changes very painful. So any strategic change that we needed from our feature teams, we were actually dependent on the legacy applications to make changes. So you can only go as fast as your slowest link, unfortunately. So we quickly realized that we had to do something about the existing applications as well. So we started by analyzing the cycle time of the existing applications and looking at the cycle time data. On average, getting value from the delivery pipeline across Maersk Line IT takes a very long time. So on average, it was 150 days. And this actually includes like errors and very small changes as well on the left side, so it's not a very good representative of how slow we were. So this time, we set off on a different path, one that was more evolutionary. So this time we had existing setup, existing platforms, and existing teams. And using Lean and Agile, we started looking at the rest of the IT landscape, all the legacy applications. And we needed to form a vision of where we want to get to. So this was our vision. We want to be able to deliver an increment of value in less than 90 days. And this needs to be supported by an agile mindset. So, okay, 90 days, it's a great vision. People loved it, but how on earth are we going to do that? So we started by looking at various schools of thought in the Lean and Agile, and we looked at around 300 practices, and we cherry-picked 8 practices that would work given our context. But this time we took a more scientific approach, and Lean product development brings more of a scientific evidence base as to why these things work. And these were the 8 that we decided should be suitable for all the applications in the landscape. And you may ask why these 8 practices, obviously, because they don't require significant engineering practices. They work with our outsource model, as I said, where having co-located teams was not our reality. And they can actually be scaled and handle interdependencies across the teams within the portfolio. So I want to talk about briefly some of these practices today. So we were looking at the whole process, end-to-end innovation process, and these 8 practices actually formed a very clear design criteria as to how the innovation process should be working across the whole portfolio. And we named this process as Lightbulb to Life because we like giving different names at Maersk Line to everything that is very standard, like concept to cash. So we want it to be different. So as I said, we picked this, we basically were looking at the cycle time data. And if you look at the data, one of the slowest application was our global booking application, which is called the GCSS. And getting something out of GCSS pipeline was very, very hard. It took almost more than a year in order to get one change. And I experienced this as well, so I asked for a change, and I moved on to a new role before I actually saw that the change was realized. So it happens. So we actually piloted these 8 practices on the slowest application, and which was actually the most complex application in the landscape. And one of our board members actually said, you know, you must be crazy to try this on GCSS. They thought we were nuts, basically. As I said, we took a more scientific approach. So as part of this, we looked at a lot of data, but we also looked at the work in progress status across the whole portfolio. And as you can see, there is a lot of things going on upstream of prioritization. So a lot of requirements being analyzed. So almost 3,000 requirements, as opposed to how many are in development, 300 something. So this is across the whole portfolio. It's a snapshot at any given time, basically. So it takes a long time to get to the point of prioritization. So we might be analyzing, writing business cases, asking for funding and approval, basically, or having a ping pong between business and IT. It's a long process. And our governance process was very much focused on selecting the right idea, and this slowed down the upstream process very, very much. And if you look at the picture from a requirements perspective, so this was a very typical value stream map we had, and this is an idea that was actually delivered. So it gets captured, then there is 18 weeks of waiting. This is the ping pong between business and IT, trying to figure out whether this idea is valuable or not, trying to get approval and funding. And then there is a proof of concept for 24 hours, 11 weeks of waiting, and development and testing, 82 hours. 9 weeks of waiting before it goes live, and 9 weeks of waiting because of the SLA with our vendor. It takes 9 weeks to deploy anything at Maersk Line, and no one had challenged that contract before. Anyway, so 38 weeks of waiting. And the funny thing is, we were very much focused on the efficiency and flow of the development and testing part. It's a paradox, isn't it? You know, it's not urgent until it gets development and testing. Of course it is, and it has the same cost of delay. So how can we focus this upstream process? How can we actually get rid of this fuzzy front end? So we introduced some simple principles. We introduced the triage process. So the idea with the triage process was to quickly identify what is most valuable for the organization. We don't want to be doing too much analysis too early. We don't want to be doing precise benefit cases and calculations, right? Don't waste time on low-value ideas. We want to get to the point of prioritization very quickly. Then once the ideas are prioritized, they go on to the dynamic priority list. So that's our backlog. We didn't want to name the backlog, because backlog was associated with negative terms at Maersk Line. You know, it was associated with clogged pipelines. So we called it the dynamic priority list. It can change any time, right? New ideas will come in any time. So the dynamic priority list is ordered based on an economic framework, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then we have a pull system in place, and when the teams have capacity downstream, they pull from the top of the list, top of the dynamic priority list, and they pull into the analysis part. And that's time boxed to 2 weeks. We don't want to waste time doing too much analysis too early. So the analysis needs to be just in time for the development team to start working on it. And during this refine phase, the ideas were broken down as well. And during this refine phase, we also expect more than 10% attrition. Otherwise, you're doing too much analysis. Your upstream process is too heavy. It needs to be simple and quick, half the time. So these were the 2 practices we introduced to keep the fuzzy front end under control. We also needed a better way to prioritize our ideas, because the demand from IT was continuously increasing. You know, this is our reality, right? IT, consumerization of IT. We all have, you know, we all use Facebook. We all have iPhones, even internet on the planes these days. So IT isn't magic anymore. So we expect more from IT, even working in a shipping company. And every strategic change is actually dependent on IT to make change. And not only they expect more, we also need more. So the demand is continuously increasing. And if the demand is more than the supply, it becomes a problem of economics, basically. We need prioritization. So let me ask you guys, how do you guys prioritize in your organizations? As light as possible. Any methods? Relative prioritization? Relative, okay. Okay. Anyone using Moscow? No? Okay, so a few people are using Moscow. Benefit cost ratio? How about the opinion of a CEO or another highly paid person says what's most important? No one? Well, we have, yeah, okay, so do you know the name for that? Highest paid person's opinion? Okay. So this is when the prioritization happens based on the gut feel of senior people, right? Well, I mean, we love our hippos, don't get me wrong, you know. But at Maersk Line, we actually had hippos changing jobs every 2-3 years. We hire a lot of generalist people, and people move on to new jobs before they see through the change that they introduce themselves. I mean, it happened to me as well. I shared it with you, so it was the case. So probably your hippo is not going to look like this, but probably he's going to look like something like this. So this is actually one of our hippos who has been in the same position for more than 20 years. He has deep knowledge about business and all our processes. So he was very expert in his field, actually. So what we did was, this was our first prioritization session where we actually started talking about value and urgency. So we laid out 23 cards on the table. We're trying to do relative prioritization to start with. And he picks one very, you know, in a very enthusiastic way, and he basically says, this is the number 1 priority, puts that requirement on the top. And you know what? Everyone in that room is working for him. Did anyone challenge him? No, obviously not. No one challenged him. But after a couple of hours, that one requirement was actually number 9 on the list. Why? What happened was we started using economics in order to prioritize. We were sharing our assumptions, and we were comparing and contrasting. So no more hyper-prioritization. We have an economic framework to prioritize ideas. We use cost of delay divided by duration to prioritize our ideas. And most importantly, we surface our assumptions, our hidden assumptions. We make those assumptions visible to everyone, and we encourage product owners to compare and contrast. So we speak the language of money. This has obviously significant benefits. The prioritization was mostly based on yelling and screaming beforehand. And now it's more data-driven and more visible to everyone. And it also enables better trade-off decisions across the whole portfolio. So, and most importantly, it changes the conversation from cost to what is more valuable, to the value side of equation. So we are no longer focused on minimizing cost, but we are focused on maximizing value. You can go back and try this at home if you want to. Ask each person on one of your project teams, what would you estimate the cost of delay of your project to be? And don't be surprised if the answer changes, if the answer varies a lot by 50 to 1. People have a very bad intuition about this. We all make different assumptions. And probably we are making some terrible trade-off decisions on a day-to-day basis based on your behalf, basically. They are making a lot of terrible decisions. So along the way, we realized something interesting about value once we introduced this economic framework. This is the backlog of the same system, GCSS, and you can see the distribution of value. So this is the top 25% of the requirements, so that's the average value per week, and that's the bottom percent. It's almost 1,000 times more valuable. So your top quartile is much more valuable than your bottom quartile. In fact, if you look at the shape of the distribution, it's a power law curve. You have heard of 80-20 rule probably. We have actually proven that through data. So there are a very small number of features that have very high impact on the organization. And this wasn't obvious until we considered the cost of delay. And the interesting thing was, every team we engaged with, when we introduced cost of delay, we realized that they all have the same shape. Maybe the range is a bit different, but it's exactly the same shape. It's power law curve. So that was how we actually improved prioritization and how we focused the fuzzy front end. And I will discuss now how we enable smooth, sustainable flow. So as I mentioned, we had worked in waterfall ways for a very long time. That meant that you would basically define the scope of your releases up front, you would do the analysis, detail out everything, and then you would ask for funding. That would get funded as well. And that batch would travel through the process together, design, development, and testing. So this has two key problems. First of all, if you have a very risky requirement in that batch, and if that requirement is delayed, then the whole batch is delayed. Our releases were never on time. And if you project this process onto the development perspective, they suffered from feast and famine. So they had a lot of work, working weekends and nights, and nothing afterwards. They were begging for work. And the funny thing was, when we calculated the idle hours, it was actually about 10,000 hours of idle time that they had. So we did a couple of things in order to change this. First of all, we had releases every 13 weeks. And as I said, they were never on time. And if you don't know when the next release is going to be, you basically push and shove to get on that train. You want to get on that train because you never know when the next is going to come over. So otherwise you would have to wait for a long time, which further increases your business risk and technical risk. So we started releasing more frequently and fixed the schedule. So we now had every 7 weeks we had a release train, and regardless of whatever was ready, the train left. And if something wasn't ready, then it goes on to the next train. And the next train is around the corner because now we have trains every 7 weeks. So this might sound obvious to you guys, but we actually had to make the case for this. And really, we tried really hard to change this, unfortunately. And we had a lot of pushbacks. People complained about it's going to cost to have releases, and so we had to prove that it was not going to, through data, it was not going to cost more. And the other thing we changed was to implement a pull system. We have realized that in order to implement a pull system, we had to change the funding model, because we used to fund big batch of requirements up front, which meant that we actually detail out the scope up front. And the reason for that is basically we used to treat IT as a tap, right? Suddenly you lose your funding and you lose your vendor team. This actually happened to me. One of my teams had to let go of one of the teams. And when we actually got funding approved by the business, we had to fund the learning curve as well. So you can't just turn it off and on, you can't treat IT like a tap. You need to have sustainable teams where you fund the capacity. So we want to basically fund the capacity to deliver change and make small adjustments over time. We don't want to have this case where we fund the learning curve as well. So we actually proposed 3 potential funding models for the governance board to consider. The first one was time-based funding. So they could fund a given team size for a period of time. So this could be monthly or quarterly, whatever they prefer. They could do buffering. They could fund small batches of requirements that were on top of the dynamic priority list, 4 or 5 at any given time, whenever you need it. Or you do just-in-time funding. As soon as the team is ready to pull a requirement, you decide whether you want to fund that one requirement on the top of the priority list or not. So luckily, having seen the idle time data, they actually went for the time-based funding, because there is an administrative cost on these ones. But for some smaller system, we actually tried buffering, which could be more sensible option, basically. We actually offered buffering as an option. So time-based funding meant that they could actually have a look at what was delivered over the last quarter and what is upcoming. You can have a look at the snapshot shot of the dynamic priority list, what is there on the top, and you can decide whether you want to fund it or whether you want to actually adjust capacity of the team. You don't want to be doing dramatic changes, as I said. You can increase the capacity or decrease it over time. So on a quarterly basis, we would make this decision. And when we presented the data on idle time, one of the board members said, "I can't see a reason why we shouldn't do this." So it's common sense. So by changing the release frequency, implementing a pull system, and flexible funding process, we were able to enable smooth, sustainable flow. So now we don't bother with scope. We have flexible scope, and we have pull system to start work, and we don't bother with schedule anymore because we have cadenced releases every 7 weeks. So if the scope is flexible, how am I going to know what goes into a release? That was the question I got from all of the product owners, basically. So this is how we presented them. We measured the duration for each step in the process, the cycle time of each step, let's say, and we basically did a backwards calculation. So let's say if this requirement in development doesn't go into demo before 14th of July, then it's less likely to go into the next release. Probably it's going to go into the release after. So this is a probabilistic way of calculating what's going to go into the release. And we said to the product owners, as we get closer to the release date, the probability of scope is going to increase. And that's how they actually started planning around that. If they needed to do training, then they planned around that scope. And eventually, we had to change the KPIs as well, because our KPIs were very much focused on time, on scope, and on cost. And it didn't really incentivize the right behavior. So let's take a look at the on-time delivery KPI, so delivering on a predicted date. If you're going to be punished by being late, you probably make sure that you're on time by adding buffers. So that was basically a trigger for adding buffers, but also slow delivery as well. So we want to maximize the speed in getting to the point where value starts to be realized, so which means that we need to measure lead time. And we had to change the KPI to be lead time. Well, it was not very straightforward. We had to go rounds and rounds with senior stakeholders, but also people on the ground, to convince them on this. Because Maersk is a very hierarchical organization, but they have a tendency to challenge everything. We have very smart people. Everyone needs to be convinced to make any change, not only the top management. So what about the outcomes? You may want to ask about the outcomes. So did they actually make any positive difference? Yes, it did. We had dramatic improvements in cycle time. So these were our two applications that were very, very slow, and they were actually the core applications within the landscape. And suddenly they weren't the bottleneck anymore. Any strategic change we were dependent on these guys to make any changes. And just to give you an idea of the scale, so SAP team was the finance applications, invoicing and payment applications, and they were like around 150 people. And GCSS was around 40 people, basically. So on the quality side, amazingly, by introducing new feedback loops and speeding up the feedback loops, we were able to reduce the number of defects, delays, and patches dramatically. On the value side, we had much more visibility of what was going on, the value that was being delivered across these two systems. Unfortunately, we don't have a per application basis data on this, but if you compare it to the Maersk IT average, it's a dramatic improvement, as you can see. And we were delivering cheaper. And to be clear, this wasn't what we promised to anyone in the organization. And this wasn't what we were expecting, but changing the focus from cost to value, actually we were delivering cheaper, We had more throughput out of the system even. And if you ask the people, everyone loved it. They were very happy to be involved, and these were the things that we heard from people. This was actually the delivery manager of the booking application, and this is what he said after the first release. First release with the improvements, basically. Okay, I have 5 minutes, apparently. I would like to share some learnings from this approach, the evolutionary approach as well. We have learned that it's actually possible to make a huge impact on cycle time without changing engineering practices, as you have seen. One of the challenges we had was that our stakeholder map shifted massively. So which meant that we basically were going 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. We had new management coming in. We had to explain all the time. So 70% of the time we were doing stakeholder management to protect our space, basically. So things that went well, our portfolio managers, our delivery managers were very, very excited about the change. And they actually went out and they got buy-in from the business, which made it easier for us in terms of change management. And we had all parts of the organization in our steering group, and we provided updates to them every 2 weeks. It was a very good change management approach in my view. And the cost of delay adoption with the first pilot went viral afterwards. Everyone wanted to have a piece of cost of delay, all the product owners, because we suddenly gave them a tool to communicate value and urgency. They loved it. And it was going viral. We didn't even have to train people anymore because it was just going viral. So things that could have been better. As I said, organizational changes shifted our stakeholder map 3 times. We didn't introduce training on principles early on, unfortunately. We trained people on practices, and we didn't set up our champions network early on. That came afterwards, and we started doing after the fact training. I wish we had that training early on. And there are still things that puzzle us. For instance, one of the perceptions we changed at Maersk Line was agile for legacy. They thought agile is for legacy applications. Seriously. We changed the perception that, normally people think that agile is for greenfield projects, but that wasn't the case at Maersk Line. It was weird. And one of the puzzles I still have is, how do we actually encourage the whole organization to learn? That's kind of my challenge and my puzzle that still remains. So a final piece of advice for people who are on their agile journeys or who would like to embark on their agile journeys: don't give up. It can be baby steps. You might actually impact one person at a time, maybe introduce one word into the language at a time, but don't give up. Try to avoid agile versus waterfall discussion. It is not a helpful discussion. These are all overloaded words. It's the same with methodology discussions. Don't talk about Scrum or Kanban. Talk about outcomes you would like to improve. So how can we deliver value faster? How can we increase revenue here? What changes can we make? Try to focus on outcomes instead. Look at the whole end-to-end process, not just part of the process. Not only the development and testing part, not only the efficiency of that little piece. You need to look at the whole end-to-end process. Consider your governance processes as well. Start by making the problem visible. For instance, every team we touched, we started by doing an assessment, and we made the problem visible. We interviewed people, we played back their thoughts, their comments to them, and they had buy-in to the change. And that's something that I do. I mean, having left Maersk, that's something that I still do going to different organizations. And as I said, try to start with principles instead of practices or methodologies. Principles is key. And principles what enables people to make the right decisions. Study your stakeholders and try to appeal to them. And sometimes you will have to speak with data, sometimes you will inspire them, right? Appeal to hearts and minds. Yeah, data is king, but hearts is the queen, basically. Eventually, this has been a journey with lots of ups and downs. And probably you will have a similar experience as well. And during the downturns, perhaps remember that you have those outcomes that you would like to improve. Remind yourself, and remind yourself that there will be light at the end of the tunnel. Don't be afraid to try and fail, whatever the consequences are. try to set up safe to fail experiments, and I wish you the best on your journeys. Hopefully they will go well. And if you want more, sorry, we have a lot of material on blackswanfarming.com, and you can also download the Maersk Line Experience Report if you want to. And you're welcome to contact me if you have any questions.